Hey there YouTube, welcome to another episode of Vance Lake Made. Today's episode we're going through how to build pallet benches. Oh, there's a mouse. Wouldn't you know it, mouse wants to watch me make YouTube videos. Come here little guy. Let me just push you. I'm trying to get into my house forever. It's time to die. Okay, this time without mouse distractions. Frickin' mice. Where was I? Oh yeah. Today's episode going through how we build pallet benches. Super fun build. Recommended doing it in the summer if you want it stained right away or painted, whichever you wanted to do. It's also already built. It's up on the deck as we speak. It's already put together, stained, everything. I'm just going to go through everything that I used to make it and go through the drawings that I made, the cut lists of wood, and I'll show you a little bit of how I took the pallets apart. Seriously doubt any of you are going to want to be building this out in the cold, in the snow, or even under your deck. But if you've got a shop to work in that's heated, that's more recommended than anything else really. But if you're like me, don't have much just yet, you can do exactly what I do. Put a tarp under your deck and make a makeshift shop. Don't need much to build much really. Just need some know-how and a little bit of redneck ingenuity. That's Canadian redneck ingenuity. You could do this project solo, or you could do it with friends, family, your wife. I did it with my wife. It was amazing. We built benches too. They're up on the deck. But with that being said, I'm sure you want to hear less of me and see more of how I built these darn things. In front of me is a table full of tools that I used to build it, and it should be everything you need. If I missed anything, then I'm terribly sorry. But I'm sure you can figure that out when you get to it. Get to a point like cutting where you get all your measurements made and drawn out on your wood and realize you don't even have a saw. Don't do that. So, to the table of tools. All right, here we go. Tables of tools. Everything that you need. Just gonna start from this end and work that way. I think that's obvious by where my camera's going. Oh, sorry, am I making you dizzy? I didn't mean to do that. You people probably get tired of me waving the camera around all over the place. Well, in any case, you're gonna have to put up with it. It's just part of it. Trying to make a video here. All right, remember last week I said you could do this with cordless drills or you could do it with corded drills, whichever you prefer. Regular, impact, doesn't matter. I prefer the impact just because it's got a little bit more kick to it. If I need screws countersunk, it does it with ease. I use lithium batteries. I think these are 18 volt. Oh yeah, look at that. It says right on the side. What do you know? And yeah, go from there. Holy crap, I think the mice are in my tarp. Ah. I think he fell. He fell. He was right in there somewhere. Please don't fall on me. I don't want mice down my back. What if you have diseases? Oh dear. Okay, anyways, not in England. Sorry, Queen. On with the tools. Bits, you might need a Phillips, depending on which screws you use, or depending on which screws are in your pallets that you need to undo for materials. Most of what I use are wood screws, so Robinson bit, square bit works just fine. Pencil, square, combo square, sander, that'll be for finishing. That's a little later. I recommend, you only really need one grit of sandpaper for it. It's not nothing too fancy. It's just outside. You're staining it after anyways. There's a lot of people out there that don't even sand it before they stain it. We did, just because there's a couple of these wood pallet pieces that have pretty sharp edges on them. Lots of splinters. You get really splintery sometimes, or just pieces that look like this. All kinds of, wouldn't want slivers on you. So sander is nice to have. I'd go heavy grit of sandpaper. Can't remember what grit I used, to be honest. Oh yeah, there we go. 20, 80. Other things, tape measure, that's an obvious one. You're gonna need to make measurements. Your pencil, need to mark those measurements. Clamps, varying sizes. Most of what I use, especially when I'm cutting, are the bigger ones. They just hold the wood for me when I'm cutting a lot nicer. I usually only need to use one of those, whereas if I was just using these tiny guys, probably need both of them on there. I really don't need much more than 2 of each. That's all I had. Built them just fine. For getting the pallets apart, I highly recommend that you get yourself, all you need really is a hammer and a wedge. My wedge just happens to be the head of an axe. Works pretty darn good actually, prying the wood apart, nails. Heck, even some spots with some of those really grabby screws that are basically designed not to come out. I was pulling them out with just a wedge and hammer. You just need a little bit of know-how and leverage. That's it. The only real hassle of using pallets is taking them apart, and hopefully you take into consideration when you're building these benches that you might need to take these pallets apart more than what you would have originally thought, depending on if you do what I do or if you do your own thing. I had to take the pallets apart a lot more than what I wanted to originally, but more on that later. So safety glasses, always use safety glasses. I hate getting wood chips in the eyes. It just sucks. Have your saw ready. Extension cord, depending on how far away you are from a plug-in. What I got under the deck here is, well, my plug-in is just above me over here, but I have to run my extension cord to the edge of the deck, and then I have it looped up over there. I mainly use it over here, so I got a little screw holding it there for me, and I just keep everything overhead. It's a lot nicer. I can move this to wherever I need to in the yard. Yeah, honestly, it's pretty handy. But that's pretty special for my circumstances. You guys probably have something even better than that. So stain is what we use. We use this semi-transparent chocolates looking stuff. I think it looks really pretty. Me and my wife picked this out together, and it was decently cheap for the amount you get in it. We thought we were going to use a lot more than we did. That thing's still 3/4 full. You don't really need as much as we got, but I'm sure there'll be more projects in the future. A couple paintbrushes. Rags work too. I'd almost recommend more than paintbrushes to use old rags. We use paintbrushes. I think it's a lot faster with paintbrushes. You really slop it on there. We had lots of stains, so we were allowed to be liberal with it. We really only did 2 coats max on most of it. Other stuff you're gonna need to build it, just a lot of different sizes of screws. I used everything all the way down from 1/2 inch, which isn't seen there, the 1 inch, 1.5 inch, 2 inch, 2.5, 3 inch, 3.5. Pretty much used them all on these benches. You probably don't need to. Long story short, if they don't pass all the way through both boards that you want them to, don't use that size. If they pass too far through and you got something hanging out on the other side, don't use that size. Plain and simple. Other things you're gonna need, these L brackets, really nice for keeping things square, and corners also really help increase the rigidity, stiffness, all that. Keeping things square. I love them, they're beautiful. I really only used, I think, 2 per bench. I probably could have used 4 per bench easily, even more than that. It just depends on where you find them necessary and where you don't find them necessary. Other things, hinges, 2 per bench. If you make an end table, you probably don't need all these flat brackets. I did, because these are all my plywood cutoffs from doing the bench tops, and I wanted to use up the scrap material. I didn't feel like buying another sheet of plywood, so I use the cutoffs and put them together with the flat brackets. So another hinge for that. Something that I found really handy with these benches is, especially when you have a setup where you gotta open it and then you gotta open another door underneath, these hooks here, I use 2 per bench. Just these tiny little things, you screw them in. You can screw them in by hand. They're pretty easy to get in there. Use a drill too, it's probably faster than using your hands. And a little bit of this chain. I used 1 foot of chain per bench. And they just hook in there. Holds it up there for you nice and easy. So you can open up your container, and there's your cushions. That's where we store our cushions. Looks much nicer in the summer. I'm sure I'll include a couple pictures in the video so you can see what it looks like all put together. Or better yet, check out my Instagram. It all looks really pretty on there. The end table, propane storage for the fire pit. If you don't have a fire pit, that's definitely optional. I made it so it could contain a propane tank because, well, who really wants a propane tank hanging out in the middle or wherever you can see it? If you can hide it, that's much more preferable. Holy crap, I think there's mice in the freaking containers. Oh, they're scurrying around in there somewhere. Hopefully they're not in there with the... I don't think there's any holes in those. I think we'll be fine. They're just mice anyways, right? But hey, what do you know? It's pretty much everything I use. Alright, well, let's clear this table off, and I'll get to showing you how to pry those pallet pieces apart.
Whew, getting rammy.
Miscellaneous pallets used for this project too. I cut them apart already. The big ones that I used were like 10 to 20 feet long, and I was able to cut them apart pretty nicely. I just took a chainsaw and went down each side of the longer pieces. The longer pieces you can get out of it, the better. All the other shorter pieces in between you can eventually use, or they will just eventually turn into cut-off material. I got all kinds of cut-off material everywhere here, but it'll all get used at some point for something. Now, I was going to show you, because sometimes, if you can see that, these little screws are basically made to not come out of there, because a lot of times people build pallets, they don't want you to have the wood from them like a bunch of turd monkeys. So there's ways we can work around that. I'm just gonna show you what I did to pry these extra pieces off after I sawed these pallets apart, and go from there. Now, all this stuff that we cut off of here, see my pallet cut-offs. If you don't end up using them for anything, can't end up using them for anything because they're too short, or even if they're big enough you can, but you just don't do as many projects as I do. You know, somebody with a wood burning stove, or even take everything out camping, I'd take it all out camping, burn it there. Just burn it, use it up. There's no sense in throwing it away if you can use it for something. Anyways, take your clamps, clamp it to the table as best you can. Make it clamp it on there so it's not going to move around too much. Hopefully you guys have a heavier bench or something than I do. You probably even do this on the ground, really. But see, my desk wobbles around quite a bit, so nothing too stable there, but that's okay. I make it work. That's all you gotta do, make it work. Originally, my wedge here was a hatchet. Hatchets work nicer. It's got a handle on it that you can hang onto your wedge with. But my hatchet was turned into a wedge for involuntary reasons. Basically, sometimes the wood on here breaks off easily enough. If it doesn't break off easily enough, what you do, you just hit it with the axe, pops right out of it. When I had my hatchet, it was just beautiful. Chop, chop, chop. Just very small little pieces. And half of it stays on there because it's always wedged between the screws. But like I said, you just take your hammer or your axe again, just pound it out of there, and it'll work lovely. Now, with your wedge, some of these, wedge in there as best you can. Hammer it in there. Like I said, with the hatchet, it was really nice because I had a handle on there, and I would use that to pry. And honestly, that's what ended up breaking it in the long run, is me prying it, because axes aren't really made to be made into pry bars that way. So if you have a pry bar, that would probably be better to use than an axe. I didn't have a pry bar here at the time, so make it work. Use what you got. If it ends up breaking, well, for me it was a cheap hatchet anyways, got it for Christmas one year. Heck, even just buy a cheap hatchet if you want to replace it. They're easy enough to sharpen and maintain, and easy enough to buy a new one if you need. But anyways, wedges, get it in there, loosen it up really good, pry it off. You got your hammer, pry the wood right out of there. Yep. Don't forget to drop your hammer. That's very important. Always drop your hammer. Anyways, some of these screws, sometimes, or nails, they stick out a little far. It's hard to get good leverage on them. Or even, if you can't grab it anywhere any lower than the head, then it makes it really hard to pry out. Especially with these screws, they just won't pry out. So, to get more leverage, what I do, I take my wedge and I turn it around, and gives myself a higher point to work off of. So then, this is why it would be nice to have forearms, or at least like maybe another tripod to hold this, or like maybe I should have gotten my wife to hold the camera for me. That would have been nice. But basically, put your wedge in backwards, or your axe head in this case. Turn around, give you a higher ground to work off of with your hammer. That gives you way better leverage. And then, sure, it'll take a little bit of pull still yet, but it'll pull out there way easier, especially if your wedge stays. And just like that, you pulled a screw out that wasn't meant to come out. Simple. And yeah, as far as pallets go, that's a lot of work to do just to get some extra wood. But if you're cheap like me, it can be done. And let me tell you, I have got a lot of wood out of taking pallets apart. Didn't even have to buy much of my own wood. Like, probably would have spent about $100 alone on wood and projects alone, and well, that's saving money right there, boys and girls. I'm not sexist, I swear. Yeah, might as well do this other one while I'm here. Got it up here, got it clamped. There's another one. No one bites dust. Ow! Another one bites dust. Woohoo! Another one bites dust. Ow! Another one bites dust. Hey, hey! And there you go. And got a full length to do whatever you want with. Right, now I'm going to get to the drawings that I drew in a book on like cut lists and basically just like the general blueprints of how I made these gosh darn benches. Gotta clear the table again though. Get off there.
Whoo, getting rammy.
Now you're gonna have to forgive these drawings. They're a little chicken scratched, but they're pretty much just for planning. Do what works for you. If it works better for you, heck, do it on the computer. I'm no good at computers. I couldn't make it work for me to with any amount of speed to make it matter, really. So pen and paper, pencil and paper probably works better in the long run. Now when you're figuring out how big you want to make these benches, the first thing I do right off the bat is measure the area that you want these benches to fit in, because if you make them too big, well, they're not going to fit in the spot that you want them to now, are they? And if you make them too small, honestly, that could be a preference thing. It might look funny in your space. If they're too small in a big open space, and it sounds like a personal problem. But we made them fit in an area, took some measurements. Basically, it was going up on the deck, labeled deck, obviously. Measure out space you're putting it in. Ours was 5 foot by 9 foot 11-ish. So it worked out perfectly for the size of Tupperware containers that we wanted to do for it. Start with your long pieces. The pieces that you know you're gonna be needing. I knew I was gonna be needing about 4 feet for each bench. The one closest to the house I had to cut a little short, but that's okay. That was kind of a circumstantial thing as far as we were concerned. You might have better circumstances. Always start with your longer lengths, go from there, especially when you're working through a cut list. If you have everything planned out already and you're going through cutting all your long lengths down to size, start with your long pieces first and then work to your smaller pieces. It'll work a lot better when you start to run out of material, because you'll sometimes you'll just start cutting all your short pieces, and you'll get all your short pieces cut and then realize, oh no, I cut all my long pieces into short pieces. Now I don't have any pieces long enough to cut my long pieces. And a Reese's Pieces in your mouth tastes really good. Yeah, don't mind me. Measure things that you're gonna be building the benches around. If you're like me and like hidden storage, make sure you measure all that stuff too. When you get all your pieces cut, you put them into their respective categories. Build every section at a time separately. So for example, I got a backrest, I built that separately. The sides, ×2, I build those separately. And then it's not shown here, but I build the front. When you're building each section of parts, you want to think about how they're going to fit together in the end. So you build the backrest, you build the sides, you think about where they're going to connect, make sure there's room for them, you make sure you plan and have a method to connect each one. So whether you're screwing them together or using those brackets like I showed you, connecting them in the end. Hey bud. Just make sure that you have a plan and make sure your measurements are all gonna line up properly. So if these sides, for example, weren't the same height as my front, and I go to put the lid down, I'd probably have a big gap in here or a big gap in the front if my sides were taller than my front, and so on. So like I said, just make sure your measurements all correspond with one another and it fits together the way you want it to. So if we're looking at the benches to the drawing again, might give you a better representation. Backrest, that's them bad boys. This is 2 benches, kind of just slid together. I screwed them together in between there, just keep them rigid and keep from moving around so much. The fronts are pretty much the only part of the pallets that I didn't cut apart completely. The rest of them I pretty much had to cut apart completely to get the look I wanted. You guys might not have to do that, but I did. It still gets the effect across that they're pallet benches, and like, you still save wood and everything. You just don't save much for time and thinking doing it that way. Put it that way. Here's our sides. So let's see, right down here. Now, with these hinges, the placement of them, I like them there. I like seeing them. To consider when you're building these benches, especially if you're building them to contain something like a Tupperware container, is right back there, kind of back here on the axis of which it articulates. If you put the hinges in the wrong spot, it's not going to articulate properly. It's going to want to ram itself, and you're going to have issues opening and closing the lid because your Tupperware container's in the way or something. These hooks, like I say, are optional, but they're really handy. Sometimes you get a little bit of a issue where it splits the wood like this. As far as I'm concerned, it's hardly noticeable. I'll probably end up clamping this and gluing it in the summer when there's not ice in there. Wait for everything to thaw. That'll be a lot better. Those L brackets that are nice and handy to use. Sorry, let me just show you those quick. The spots I used them was in the back there on both sides. That just helped keep the back together really square and rigid. These up top would have done the same thing. all together by themselves, but I was having trouble in the position I was in, figuring out how I wanted to attach that back cross member, because back here it sits pretty close to the back wall here, so I didn't really have any extra space to put much else other than that. That works, or heck, even those straight brackets that I showed you earlier for this, those would work in there too. Pretty much any shape of bracket that you think will work somewhere to better the strength and just ease of building and figuring out where to put your screws. You know, you just kind of have to figure it out as it comes to you. Or plan ahead. Other places I would have probably used those L brackets, especially for this top section, because on this one in particular, I'll admit, it sometimes pops itself out of square. Now I could easily avoid that by putting a couple more of these L brackets in here or down here and cutting the ends off, or even down inside there on the bottom. That'd make it a lot better. We made custom cushions. My wife made custom cushions actually, with pillows and sheets of foam. My wife is amazing, and she built these cushions. Now, don't get me wrong, of course, you could definitely just buy cushions, but we're already cheaping out on buying wood for material, so why not cheap out on everything too? And really, you don't need much. We didn't need much. When these are all put together, they look phenomenal. My wife even did a couple fancy cushions. Now, be careful. Sometimes they bleed if they get wet. Make sure that you don't get them wet. Or make them so that if they do get wet, they won't bleed. I'll be honest, I didn't think they were gonna bleed. They look great. Even with them bleeding, it looks great. It's functional. It does exactly what it needs to do. It's comfortable. And keep in mind, for really good cushions in Red Deer, Alberta right now, I think I was looking at Home Hardware. They were on for like $70 for a set of cushions, and not even a full set of cushions. You'd be like, for what we had here, you'd probably easily spend $300 just in cushions. That's a load of bull crap. So if you're doing it the cheap way and you're a good do-it-yourselfer like we are, don't spend $300 on cushions, for Pete's sake. Just build them. They're easy enough to build. All you need to do is learn how to run a sewing machine. I don't know how to work a sewing machine. That's why I got my wife to. I know how to work the drill, the saw, the tape measure, all the rest of that. She helped. She knows how to do that too, but this was up her alley. She enjoyed doing these. So I enjoyed building the benches. It's just wherever you think you fit. And each bench holds its own cushions. Get a good view of my butt. I sure hope so. Maybe I should start charging for these videos. Get a little extra money. Move my butt around. Man, I wish I was pretty enough to do that and make a living off of it. Sadly enough, I'm just a
ugly male with a beard. Nobody wants to see a beard with lingerie under its under torso. Moving on.
Alright, and I think with that being said, that wraps up the video on these benches. If you have any questions, because maybe I was too vague, I didn't really go through a step-by-step procedure how to build these. But yeah, if you have any questions, just ask me in the comments. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Video for next week, I'll be honest, I'm not really sure. Might do that grinder video again. We'll take that Makita 6-inch grinder apart, show you all the parts and components inside of it. Whether I name them right or not is another story. But show you to the best of my knowledge. Pretty much all I'm doing is taking a trigger out. Gonna show you the armature. If you need to change brushes, usually most of this stuff you can just figure out in the owner's manual. But if you don't like to read and you're watching this video, then might as well just watch the next video I have to do after this, if it happens to be the grinder video. In any case, I'm gonna do the grinder video at some point. You'll see it. But I don't know, if you like what you're watching, like, subscribe, do whatever you need to do. Ask questions, comment, troll me in the comments if you want. Like I said, I'll probably cry about it later, but that's okay. Everybody cries every once in a while. Need some tears going, haven't cried in forever. But yeah. That being said, I think that wraps up another episode of Vance Like Made. I'm just gonna sit back here, enjoy the fire, and go inside and drink a tea because it's still cold. Bye-bye.